So the subject for our discussion today is how can we help others find healing? It's wonderful when we experience healing for ourselves. It's what's called the pearl of great price. We learn from the Bible, however, not to keep this buried like an unused talent from that parable, which we'll talk about today, nor to hide this light where it's obscured, but where all can more clearly see. I always love the metaphor of in Christian Science healing that when you're working with a practitioner, it's like someone that comes into a dark room and shines a light more brightly that those around it can see more clearly. But do we, when it comes to sharing that, do we worry that, sharing ideas might be met with skepticism? Hasn't there always seemed to be some resistance to truth and love, even since the prophets, since Moses, since forever? And should we let that dim our light, or should we shine? So that's the topic for today. I'm going to start with some readings from the Bible, from the Voice, the Message, and the J.B. Phillips translations, as well as from Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures by Mary Baker Eddy. And then we will open it up for discussion in between. So I will read starting in Matthew. Jesus called his 12 of his followers and sent them into the ripe fields. He gave them power to kick out the evil spirits and to tenderly care for the bruised and hurt lives. Jesus sent his 12 harvest hands out with this charge. Don't begin by traveling to some far-off place to convert unbelievers. And don't try to be dramatic by tackling some public enemy. Go to the lost, confused people right here in the neighborhood. Tell them that the kingdom is here. Bring health to the sick. Raise the dead. Touch the untouchables. Kick out demons. You have been treated generously, so live generously. Don't think you have to put on a fundraising campaign before you start. You don't need a lot of equipment. You are the equipment. And all you need to keep that going is 3 meals a day. When you knock on a door, be courteous in your greeting. If they welcome you, be gentle in your conversation. If they don't welcome you, quietly withdraw. Don't make a scene. Shrug your shoulders and be on your way. Don't be intimidated. Eventually, everything is going to be out in the open, and everyone will know how things really are. So don't hesitate to go public now. Stand up for me against world opinion, and I'll stand up for you before my Father in heaven. Don't think that I've come to make life cozy. If you don't go all the way with me through thick and thin, you don't deserve me. If your first concern is to look after yourself, you'll never find yourself. But if you forget about yourself and look to me, you'll find both yourself and me. We are intimately linked in this harvest work. This is a large work I've called you into, but don't be overwhelmed by it. It's best to start small. Give a cool cup of water to someone who is thirsty, for instance. The smallest act of giving or receiving makes you a true apprentice. You won't lose out on a thing. Let me tell you why you are here. You are here to be salt seasoning that brings out the God flavors of this earth. If you lose your saltiness, how will people taste godliness? You've lost your usefulness and will end up in the garbage. Here's another way to put it. You're here to be light, bringing out the God colors in the world. God is not a secret to be kept. We're going public with this, as public as a city on a hill. If I make you light bearers, You don't think I'm going to hide you under a bucket, do you? I'm putting you on a light stand. Now that I've put you there on a hilltop, on a light stand, shine. Keep open house. Be generous with your lives. By opening up to others, you'll prompt people to open up with God, this generous Father in heaven. And from Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures. A Christian Scientist occupies the place at this period of which Jesus spoke to his disciples when he said, "Ye are the salt of the earth. Ye are the light of the world. A city that is set on an hill cannot be hid. Let us watch, work, and pray that this salt lose not its saltness, and that this light be not hid, but radiate and glow into noontide glory." Jesus established in the Christian era the precedent for all Christianity, theology, and healing. Christians are under as direct orders now as they were then to be Christ-like, to possess the Christ spirit, to follow the Christ example, and to heal the sick as well as the sinning. It is easier for Christianity to cast out sickness than sin, for the sick are more willing to part with pain than are sinners to give up the sinful, so-called pleasure of the senses. The Christian can prove this today as readily as it was proved centuries ago. Our Master said to every follower, "Go ye into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. Heal the sick." So the first question I'd like to open up for our discussion is, what is needed to be able to go out into our community and help someone find healing?
Well, I would think, first of all, you'd have to know if there is someone who needs healing. I guess in order to know that, you'd have to ask God, listen to his answer. You'd have to be willing to go, and you'd have to be confident in knowing that God heals.
Yeah, I like what you said, Joy, about what would be needed. I was talking with a Christian Science lecturer recently, and she's a big fan of going out and, you know, by their fruits you shall know them, to prove the fruits, to prove the healing efficacy. That a lot of times there's people that get really comfortable in Christian Science, and we're called to go out and do that. And she said, in a community such as where we are in the Olympia area, I mean, you can't go, a quarter mile without finding someone that would have a need of healing. So whether or not the need there, I think, is self-evident. I think it's more often, do we feel confident in healing? And that'll be, one of the next questions I ask, is, what's needed for that? Because a lot of times we feel like it's dependent on us, whereas that's just a suggestion of mortal thinking, of animal magnetism, whatever you call that slippery serpent that just suggests all the garbage. But in reality, God does the work, and as long as we're following, as you said, where He directs us, and there's always the ability to, if you feel like you have sufficient idea on how to share these healing ideas, you can always, turn down a case if it doesn't feel like it's the right mentality, if there's receptivity to it. But overall, I think a lot of times, we stop before we get started, just in our own circle of thinking. And I think that's just the way that mesmeric suggestion tries to keep us from doing the healing work.
Well, I was going to continue by saying that there are people even in the building that I live in who mention problems. And so my first step there, most of them are pretty firm in their belief in God, but also in their belief in medicine. So my first reaction is just to refuse to accept that this is a possibility in God's kingdom, just silently, and ask if there's any way that I can help, and just listen for what God tells me. Sometimes people are open to the ideas that we have to share, but I think we do have to tread very carefully and make sure that God is leading us, because we don't want to upset anyone and make things worse. Or, and I've always felt led to share science and health, and I've only once had someone return science and health to me and say, this isn't for me. But up to now, where I'm living, I haven't felt that leading from God. But what I can do all the time is just make sure that I'm not accepting the belief, whatever it is that they have, into my own thinking. Or because if I accept it into my thinking, I'm giving it a reality which it doesn't have. And if I'm refusing to accept it into my thinking, I'm denying it for everyone. It's just not possible in God's kingdom.
I appreciate that, Joy. I think that's similar to the approach that I've taken. I like this topic because I know there's room for improvement in my thinking about how to share. But my approach has generally been to pray for the world. And there, as Joel was saying, there's no lack. If you walk or drive around anywhere or read the news, we are not lacking for ideas about things to pray about. And those prayers are important and effective. But sharing on a one-to-one basis is something that I've not done as much of. I think my approach, and what has worked and led to some sharing, is simply to try to be a good Christian Scientist, not overtly, but just in my thought and behavior. And that has drawn some people to ask me, what's like, once in a while somebody will say, what's your secret? Why are you happy? Or why are you content? Or why aren't you sick? Or something like that, which can lead to a nice conversation. I do not initiate conversations about religion that often, but I know people are receptive, and I think probably my prayer for myself needs to be more receptive to God's leadings, to opportunities to share. And I know we've all probably run into people who definitely are religious oversharers or overzealous, and it's such a turnoff that I think we kind of, at least I know I do, kind of err on the other side of not saying things when there's an opportunity. But there is one mind, and I have to know that mind both speaks and listens and has those opportunities for me to participate in that conversation. So I certainly would love to hear other people's experiences and ideas on one-to-one sharing and how and when it's appropriate. But yeah, for me, it's been just being an example and having people drawn to that.
I really like this topic, and I think it's one that I think about a lot, because I want to be more spiritually courageous in saying what it is that I do and what I practice, what works for me. Getting better at it and becoming more and more courageous in that way. But what I find myself very natural to do is to share if someone's really struggling, to of course pray in my own mind and to love them. I think that's what's needed first and foremost, is for me to love them as my neighbor, love them as a brother or sister, to actually take the time to treat my thoughts and about them. But sometimes I'll just say, what I find helpful in my spiritual practice is, to see the good in others and to really focus on that, or, just some ideas that I actually practice in Christian Science, but I don't say, this is the religion that I practice and you should do it or whatever, but more about, simple ideas that really work for me and could help uplift their thinking as well, especially, oftentimes we'll be focused on problems, and many people will focus on a problem rather than the solutions. And to not only focus on, a solution, but to look at it with the lens of, a spiritual lens. I'm not sure I'm being clear right now, but yeah, I just find it really helpful to give ideas that I've had healings. This has really worked for me in my spiritual practice, and I just call it that. But I really am searching for more indirect ways to be that light. And I have some alternative things in my life that I have opportunities. I write a weekly blog at my school to the parents at 3 different campuses. And so I'll often sprinkle in, citations from Mary Baker Eddy or Bible verses in a blog with a breath. It's kind of just my way of feeling like, okay, I'm doing my part this week. Or so I find little ways like that I can share. But yeah, thanks so much for the topic, and I look forward to learning more from you all.
Thanks, Christy.
I'd like to share some experiences.
Sure.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. It's really interesting. I work on a local Indian reservation, and I was employed there to do clinical trauma therapy and drug and alcohol counseling. And so you'd think, boy, that's a tough bunch of eggs to work with. But I use Christian Science in absolutely everything I deliver. When I do a group, instead of starting out like a clinical textbook group, I start out with, who are you? And they'll look at me funny, and they'll describe themselves, in a very limited way, humanly. And then I'll give them a little more time. And I said, no, now tell me who you are. And basically, I go around the group this way, and I'll say, you are so much more than you perceive yourself to be. And I use quotes from Science and Health. and I talk about healing, and they are so receptive. You can hear a pin drop in the room, and then finally they start joining in, and they want to know more. And I've watched so many of my clients just turn it around completely. And sometimes they're not aware of why. They just said, I just don't want this anymore. And some of those people are, you know, in this experience, hardcore addicts and alcoholics, and have, you know, supposedly a lot of diagnoses. But we talk about that too. Who diagnosed you? You know, was that the creator that diagnosed you? And we really get into it. And it's such a spiritual group. And I've had people that are from various local Christian churches say that must be really difficult to work with that population because they don't, well, basically, they're not Christian. And I said, there is so much spirituality there. God didn't forget to give spirituality to the reservation. He didn't skip that part. So, and they'll come back at me with things and all kinds of questions. And I'll say, well, no, this is from Science and Health. So I have Science and Health in my office. And I also throw in quantum physics because I'm a quantum physics nut. But so I have all these books in there instead of the basic counseling books. And it works. I haven't personally to date have had any negative comments, anything said. It's just simply accepted. And I'm grateful for that. It reinforces my sense of Christian Science and what my role is. But I had to ask myself many times before that, when I'd go with a friend from church and we distribute material everywhere, and sometimes wind up handing it to people, Sentinel and Journal both. At first, I was reluctant, and I had to ask myself, what am I afraid of? What am I afraid of? There is nothing. There's only one power. There's nothing to be afraid of. Only one mind. Do I have a fear of rejection? There is no rejection other than our false concept of it, that it supposedly, it seems to exist, but there's no power there either. So if I gave out something and somebody hands it back or turns it down, that's none of my business. I have delivered the message, and that's what I was commanded to do. So that's my 2 cents worth.
Yes, and yes. I just feel like we're here to do the work. We're not here to know whether or not where that goes. God controls where it goes. You know, Scott, you mentioned, you know, even a lot of us have inhibition sometimes of maybe talking about it to people that aren't familiar with it. But I mean, it's been the same since Moses, right? He was like, what am I going to say to the children of Israel? I'm not great with words. And God's like, don't worry about it. I'm there with you. I'm doing the work. You got this, you know? So a lot of times we don't have to worry about it, but we can't get so tripped up in our own thinking, which again, I think often is just, you know, animal magnetism or mesmeric suggestion or devil or evil or whatever you call it, just trying to convince us that, yeah, you know, we can do that some other time, or maybe we don't have the right words, or maybe it's not the right time, or maybe someone's not receptive to whatever. But, you know, Christy, as you mentioned, our job is to be that healing presence, to put that out there, to share these ideas that could inspire them. And if it,
yes, and leave out that concept of many minds.
well, also the concept of self, like we don't have to worry about ego or self or how we're perceived. We're just sharing the truth and letting God.
Yes.
Well, it's happened for me in different ways, especially when I'm traveling. When I'm on a plane or something, I usually have my Bible lesson with me, or the Christian Science Monitor or Sentinel or Journal, and the person next to me will be looking sideways to see what I'm reading. And sometimes they'll even ask me what I'm reading, and I'll show it to them, and then we get into a conversation, and I end up telling them about Christian Science and my healings and things, and they want to know more, and where can they get the book. And sometimes I have books in my, paperbacks in my what do you call it, carry-on luggage, and I can share one, but I really prefer to send them to a reading room or somewhere to buy one. But there's been so much enthusiasm and amazement and receptivity. I had a conversation with someone on a train once. I was reading, and they asked me what I was reading, and so I was telling them about Christian Science. Both, and another time I was on a plane reading the lesson, and the person next to me was a priest, and he ended up asking me to pray for him. He didn't seem to know that God was present. And another time I was on a picnic with my foster son, and a Catholic priest ended up asking me, I don't remember how the conversation went exactly, but I looked at him and said, but God is right here. And he looked at me aghast. It was like the thought had never occurred to him that God was here. For him, God was way off in heaven somewhere, and you only have contact with him when you die. So another time I had a Sentinel. I was reading a Sentinel, and the guy next to me said, are you a Christian Scientist? And I said, yes. And we got into a conversation, and he said that his present fiance was a Christian Scientist. And there he was sitting next to one on the plane and asking her questions. So those are ways I've shared it when I've traveled. I've also offered it to people. One person I offered it to was really interested because of the healing aspect, and she became a member of the Mother Church and went through class instruction.
That's beautiful.
She did actually leave later and become a Baptist because somebody she got to know told her that Christian Science was of the devil. And but anyway,
But the seed was planted.
I don't think she can lose what she gained.
Oh, I was just going to say, for me, because I learned about Christian Science later, it was a surprise to me to realize that there's another option, other than going to the doctor when you're sick. And so me, often when it comes to my family, I try to just put it out there. There's another way to deal with this. There's alternative ways, and give them a little taste of what it is. So it's through prayer. It's through the fact that you're a spiritual being, and you're not, in this material body, and you're not flawed or sick, or, just giving little tastes of that, so that, my kids, when I'm not here anymore, can know, oh, my mom used to rely on this other, option, and it worked for her. And So I think that's important too, is just to say, to people that are really searching, that there's another option, because a lot of times people have never heard of it. I hadn't. I was in my 40s and first learned about Christian Science. So I think that can be really helpful, just to say, there's other options for you. That's all. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Joel.
I'm just going to jump in again with some readings so we can try to get through them all. So this is from Matthew. God's kingdom is like a man going off on an extended trip. He called his servants together and delegated responsibilities. To one he gave $5,000, to another $2,000, and to a third $1,000, depending on their abilities. Then he left. Right off, the first servant went to work and doubled his master's investment. The second did the same. But the man with the single thousand dug a hole and carefully buried his master's money. After a long absence, the master of those 3 servants came back and settled up with them. The one given $5,000 showed him how he had doubled his investment. His master commended him. Good work. You did your job well. From now on, be my partner. The servant with the $2,000 showed him how he also had doubled his master's investment. His master commended him. Good work. You did your job well. From now on, be my partner. The servant given $1,000 said, Master, I know you have high standards and hate careless ways, and you demand the best and make no allowances for error. I was afraid I might disappoint you, so I found a good hiding place and secured your money. Here it is, safe and sound, down to the last cent. The master was furious. That's a terrible way to live. It's criminal to live cautiously like that. If you knew I was after the best, why did you do less than the least? The least you could have done would have been to invest the sum with the bankers, or at least I would have gotten a little interest. Take the 1,000 and give it to the one who risked the most, and get rid of this play it safe who won't go out on a limb. Throw him out into utter darkness. Also from Matthew. Don't look for shortcuts to God. The market is flooded with surefire, easygoing formulas for a successful life that can be practiced in your spare time. Don't fall for that stuff. Even though crowds of people do, the way to life, to God, is vigorous and requires total attention. And from Science and Health. Systematic teaching and the student's spiritual growth and experience in practice are requisite for a thorough comprehension of Christian Science. Some individuals assimilate truth more readily than others, but any student who adheres to the divine rules of Christian Science and imbibes the spirit of the Christ can demonstrate Christian Science, cast out error, heal the sick, and add continually to his store of spiritual understanding, potency, enlightenment, and success. There's nothing difficult nor toilsome in this task when the way is pointed out, but self-denial, sincerity, Christianity, and persistence alone win the prize, as they usually do in every department of life. Implicit faith in the teacher and all the emotional love we can bestow on him will never alone make us imitators of him. We must go and do likewise, else we are not improving the great blessings which our Master worked and suffered to bestow upon us. Our Master cast out devils, evils, and healed the sick. It should be said of his followers also that they cast fear and evil out of themselves and others and heal the sick. Truth casts out error now as surely as it did 19 centuries ago. So the next question I'd like to put out there is, what are some ways we can take what we've learned and share it with others?
Well, I always think sharing my own healings is very convincing. And I've had quite a bit of success in the prisons sharing my own experiences, because that really brings a well, it the prisoners, they've never questioned me because they felt my sincerity. And then they go around and share them with other people. You have to listen to
I could say that having this video recorded and then shared on Facebook is a way to share with others. And I know this now because I wasn't friends with Joel before on Facebook, but now that we're friends, when he tags me, if I lead the meeting, if I host it, now it shows up to my friends. And now I've had some of my friends like the video, which I have to admit at first I was a little bit nervous about. I was a little embarrassed and nervous because, you know, I don't openly say I practice Christian Science to, you know, many people in my life, and also talking about my personal healings and things, and now it's recorded and it's out there. I was a little nervous about that as well, but I know that ultimately it's more important that I share and that I, you know, share my healings and that I'm open with it. So I think just having this meeting, having it on Zoom and recording it and putting it out there is one example of a way to share.
I think it's important that we share with each other also. It's interesting that when I was growing up, it was assumed we share this with people that are non-scientists. And yet I feel a need for us to support each other, and that should not be left out. And so I had an experience working at a little church east of San Diego. I don't know if I can share it, but it was quite dynamic. And I didn't say anything about it for a long time. And I don't know, well, yeah, I do know why. It's because it seemed so natural at the time. I just went with it. It wasn't until someone gave me feedback and said, oh my gosh, that I realized what it meant. But in working for this little church, we decided on a Sunday to go out and work in the yard. And of course, it was a San Diego day. It was close to 90. And we're all out there doing our thing, gardening and whatnot. And our practitioner was out there working as hard as the rest of us, and she was getting close to 90. But she was out there doing her job. And I had to take a rest and cool down. I went into the back of the church, was drinking some water. Everything was quiet. And then I suddenly heard a commotion out in the front of the church. And it was a lot of raised, concerned voices. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I came out through the back behind the first reader's chair. And they had laid our practitioner on her side, facing away from me on the steps. And they said, she's gone. And so they were, you know, what do we do? Who do we call? And all of this commotion, all I could think of doing was I sat in the first reader's chair and I thought of everything I could remember from Science and Health. nothing was in order, but it was everything I knew to hold to shut out the static of what I was hearing. And it must have been about 15 minutes. And I heard someone say, and I had my eyes closed, I heard someone say, she's back. And so I opened my eyes, and she raised herself up on an elbow, rolled over and looked directly at me. And she said, I heard you, dear. And she had, humanly no idea where I was sitting or anything, but she heard my thought. And she was just back and wide awake and ready to go. And I didn't think anything of it at the time. I thought, of course she's there. And so they said, where can we take you? We need to, have you looked at. And she said, no, Christy and I are going to get tortilla soup. So we went out and had tortilla soup, and that was the end of that. But so the concept of supposedly passing on is absurd. But I didn't share that with people. I just was comfortable with it. And then I realized that needed to be shared. So I have since shared it.
It's so important to, as you mentioned with the commotion, there's so often these days that we're surrounded by human opinions of things. And it's even more of an opportunity for us, as you mentioned, to really hone in on what's true and to know what's true. And that brings the healing. Getting clear on who we are and who all of us are as children of God, and that nothing can impede that. So that's a wonderful testament to it.
It seems to me that is a great lesson from that one, is to listen for the message that other people may need to hear, right? Because there are a lot of things in my life as a lifelong Christian Scientist that I take for granted. I don't think about sharing. I don't think they're that unusual. But if if I tell someone, one of my peers or friends or something, that I have never been into the hospital for a treatment of any kind, I don't go to get medical procedures, and especially as there are guys my age who are really struggling um, with body issues and medical issues and whatnot. And just that message that is a possibility, and then maybe digging down deeper and explaining, what my approach is and how this works. But I love that idea that even planting that seed that it is possible that there's something else besides this mainstream medical model. That's an important thing for the world to hear, and for our voices to get out there and share that. So thank you for that reminder, that to look at what we consider ordinary, but what might be a really important message for someone not familiar to Christian Science here.
Thanks, Scott. I also I mentioned this question earlier, I posted it in the chat, but it's a rhetorical question. Is sharing the truth that heals dependent on how much of it we understand? And in science, yeah, Mrs. Eddy tells us it's not like scholarly attainment. It's not, how, eventually you'll know enough and then you can heal. Like, healing comes from God. God does the work. We just have to show up and know and do our best to see as clearly as we can what's true about a situation, what God knows about something, what God knows about each one of us. So yeah, a lot of times I think that's one of the other suggestions that comes in, is that, oh, well, others can heal, practitioners can heal, but probably not you, because you probably you're not quite there yet. And which is, of course, bogus, because it's not dependent on us. It just to be faithful. Jesus talked about just having as much faith as a grain of mustard seed that you could move mountains. And that, he often would say, like, his disciples would come to him and say, well, why couldn't we heal this guy? And he said, because of your lack of faith. And so it's not some grand attainment that we have to have. It's just having just the simplest faith that God's work is done, that he is here now, as you mentioned, and that his healing work is untouchable, unmatched, and he is all powerful. Just knowing these things. I did want to jump in quickly with his last set of readings, and then I'll just open it up for our final question. Any others you'd like to ask before we go today? This is from Matthew. When he finally arrives, blazing in beauty and all his angels with him, the Son of Man will take his place on his glorious throne. Then all the nations will be arranged before him, and he will sort the people out, much as the shepherd sorts out sheep and goats, putting sheep to his right and goats to his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, enter, you who are blessed by my Father. Take what's coming to you in this kingdom. It's been ready for you since the world's foundation, and here's why. I was hungry, and you fed me. I was thirsty, and you gave me a drink. I was homeless, and you gave me a room. I was shivering, and you gave me clothes. I was sick, and you stopped to visit. I was in prison, and you came to me. Then those sheep are going to say, Master, what are you talking about? When did we ever see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you a drink? And when did we ever see you sick or in prison and come to you? Then the king will say, I'm telling the solemn truth. Whenever you did one of these things to someone overlooked or ignored, that was me. You did it to me. Then he will turn to the goats, the ones to his left, and say, Get out, worthless goats. You're good for nothing but the fires of hell. And why? Because I was hungry and you gave me no meal. I was thirsty and you gave me no drink. I was homeless and you gave me no bed. I was shivering and you gave me no clothes. Sick and in prison and you never visited. Then those goats are going to say, Master, what are you talking about? When did we ever see you hungry or thirsty or homeless or shivering or sick or in prison and didn't help? He will answer them, I'm telling the solemn truth. Whenever you failed to do one of these things to someone who was being overlooked or ignored, that was me. You failed to do it to me. And from Acts. One day at 3:00 in the afternoon, Peter and John were on their way into the temple for a prayer meeting. At the same time, there was a man crippled from birth being carried up. Every day he was set down at the temple gate, the one named Beautiful, to beg from those going into the temple. When he saw Peter and John about to enter the temple, he asked for a handout. Peter, with John at his side, looked him straight in the eye and said, Look here. He looked up, expecting to get something from them. Peter said, I don't have a nickel to my name. What I do have, I give you. In the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, walk. He grabbed him by the right hand and pulled him up. In an instant, his feet and ankles became firm. He jumped to his feet and walked. From James. If any of you does not know how to meet any particular problem, he has only to ask God, who gives generously to all men, without making them feel foolish or guilty. And he may be quite sure that the necessary wisdom will be given him. But he must ask in sincere faith, without secret doubts as to whether he really wants God's help or not. The man who trusts God, but with inward reservations, is like a wave of the sea carried forward by the wind in one moment and driven back in the next. That sort of man cannot hope to receive anything from God. And the life of man divided, and the life of a man divided loyalty will reveal instability at every turn. Don't, I beg you, only hear the message, but put it into practice. Otherwise, you are merely deluding yourselves. The man who simply hears and does nothing about it is like a man catching the reflection of his own face in a mirror. He sees himself, it is true, but he goes on with whatever he was doing without the slightest recollection of what sort of person he saw in the mirror. But the man who looks into the perfect mirror of God's law, the law of liberty or freedom, and makes a habit of so doing, is not the man who sees and forgets. He puts that law into practice, and he wins true happiness. And I'll just read one of these quotes from Science and Health since we're tight on time. When will Jesus' professed followers learn to emulate him in all his ways and to imitate his mighty works? May the Christians of today take up the more practical import of that career. It is possible, yea, it is the duty and privilege of every child, man, and woman to follow in some degree the example of the Master by the demonstration of truth and life, of health and holiness. Christians claim to be his followers, but do they follow him in the way that he commanded? Hear these imperative commands. Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. Go ye into all the world, and preach the gospel to every creature. Heal the sick. Millions of unprejudiced minds, simple seekers for truth, weary wanderers athirst in the desert, are waiting and watching for rest and drink. Give them a cup of cold water in Christ's name, and never fear the consequences. Those ready for the blessing you impart will give thanks. So for those of you that would like to stay for another minute or two, the last question I have is, what are some suggestions that would try to limit us from helping others, and how do we overcome them?
We've talked a bunch about a bunch of these things, but it occurs to me as I'm thinking about this, it's fear of rejection, fear of embarrassment. There's so many of these things, and it occurs to me how much I think this is coming from watching a TV show recently where it was about young people and not being able to tell each other they were attracted to each other or whatever, and it's like, just say it. But that kind of fear is similar to what no, but it is similar to what we are, in retrospect, as we get older, we realize that some of these things we were completely terrified about when we were young were really silly and inconsequential. And, the possible reactions or consequences of them were not that important. They weren't that great. And I'm guessing as we become more spiritually evolved, we will see the same thing for the resistance that we feel toward sharing spirituality. It's like, oh, why didn't I just say something to this person? So I'm trying to keep in that mindset of, there is one mind sharing ideas, amongst its various ideas, its reflections. And there's nothing in that equation of one mind, of one God and creation that can be embarrassed or rejected. God never rejects a part of himself. So if I keep that in mind, then next time I have a chance to share, I can just get right over that and just jump right into it.
And I feel like a lot of times it's even just asking questions, like asking someone, is there something that you need you could use help with. I have a spiritual practice that's worked really well with me. I'd be happy to help you if there's something that you have a need that would be helpful. There's no harm in putting that out there. I mean, the worst someone could say is no. It's no skin off our back. Like, I think a lot of times we just get in our head about things before we even try. And I think, again, that's just that aggressive mental suggestion that needs to be silenced. I was talking to a practitioner the other day, and was talking about, like, how can we get people more interested in church and in coming to church. And what she said was the only way to reach people is the actual healing work in the community. And like, she was, I was talking about advertising these things, and she's like, if you're not healing, like, what do you need to advertise? If you are healing, like, people are going to want to come to the services and learn. If you're healing, you don't need to convince people to come to church. Like, they want to know, where this healing truth came from. And that's how the science really grew initially. But I think a lot of it comes back to confidence. Like, sometimes people just don't feel that sense of confidence that they can heal, but I think it's just that sense of self, and we get self out of the way and realize that God does the work. A lot of times people will sign up for, an endless number of committees or flower pots or whatever, and it's like that one needed thing is just to go out there and bring that light that you have, to share that with someone, because we all know there's so many people in our lives and in the community. You could just walk in any direction and find someone that's, as Mrs. Eddy says, that's hungering and thirsting for righteousness, and to give them just a cold cup of water. Not the consequences.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's, it's so simple. I think that's a lot of it. It's when we look up the word resistance, what is that? It's a force. No, it's not. It's not a force. There is only one power. There's only one true consciousness. So the illusion of resistance is an illusion unto itself. And it's and we need to take like a big shovel and heap and throw personality out of the way, including our own. I'm speaking from me. It's not about persons and will this person receive this? Will they reject it? Will they? Like I said, my job is to deliver the message, and the seed planted is amazing. Even if they turn out to become a Buddhist, I mean, the seed is planted. I had a woman come to me. She somehow wound up here in Idaho Falls in her travels. I haven't seen her for 40 years since I lived in San Diego. And she recognized me and just hugged me. And she said, "Oh, I'll never forget you. Remember what you told me?" And I gave her a citation out of Science and Health. And she said, "That just changed my life." Now, how many times have we done that? And we just haven't had someone pop in and say, "This changed my life." But we have actually had that influence. So even if somebody walks away, I feel I have done the job. The message has been given. And who am I to say that they actually rejected it? There's no resistance.
If not now, when? And if not you, who? Everyone can practice Christian Science. Everyone can heal because God does the work.
If I waited until I thought I had all the knowledge, I'd probably just ascend and wouldn't be here anyway.
I don't know if you'd ascend without the practice. Because what are you proving?
There you go.
Well, this has been a great discussion. We should probably wrap it up since we're over time, but thank you all for being here. It's really been wonderful, and it's a great discussion topic. And remember, you can continue discussions on Facebook. We have a Facebook group with where we post all the topics and links, and also have conversations on this topic and others. So check that out. You can also find us we have a website, ahealinglight.org. So until next Tuesday, have a great week. And thanks again. Thanks again for the readings there, Joel.
Have a wonderful weekend.
Yeah.
So much. Thank you, Joel. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
It was great.